Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the Minneapolis Ward 10 Virtual Candidate Forum, hosted by Make Homes Happen. We're so glad to have you all with us this evening. My name is Katie. I'm the Executive Director at Align Minneapolis, a Make Homes Happen member, and I'll be the MC and moderator this evening. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We're using Zoom webinar, which means you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. We are recording this webinar and we will share it on the Make Homes Happen Facebook page at the end of the month. Audience members, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions you have for the candidates. They'll be able to answer your questions directly in a bit. Finally, for candidates who would like to do so, I invite you at this time to share your website, contact page, or email address in the chat in case voters want to follow up with additional questions. Thank you. As you all know, we have an important election coming up November 2nd, less than 2 months. All 13 Minneapolis City Council members and the Minneapolis Mayor are up for election this year, as are all Park Board members and 2 Board of Estimate and Taxation members. To see exactly who will be on your ballot, visit the Secretary of State's website. For information about when, where, and how to vote, visit vote.minneapolismn.gov. Emily, who's managing our tech tonight, will also share these links in the chat. Additionally, Minneapolis has ranked choice voting elections. This November, you will have the power to rank your first, second, and third choice candidates on your ballot. If your first choice does not continue in the instant runoff, your vote goes to your second choice. And if your second choice does not continue, your vote goes to your third choice. You should rank as many candidates as you prefer, up to 3. When you listen to the candidates tonight, consider not just your first choice, but also your second or third. Before we hear from candidates, let me tell you a little bit about Make Homes Happen. We are a coalition of community-based groups and organizations that advocate for affordable housing development, preservation, and tenant rights in Minneapolis. In 2017, we helped successfully push for a $40 million investment to the Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Yet even then, the housing needs of our community far outweighed the dollars spent. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated what was already a housing crisis, and we know housing is a critical issue for our city. City leaders have significant influence on the policies, programs, and funding choices that impact our community. That's why Make Homes Happen is hosting this forum tonight. In order to ensure the fairness of our election series, Make Homes Happen used a uniform process in communicating with candidates. We approached each candidate and invited them to participate in a Zoom interview about housing. The interview included 3 questions, and candidates had 2 minutes to respond to each question. We recorded candidates' answers and will play them back for you now as opening statements for this event. Note that we did not edit the content of candidate responses, but we did cut each answer off at 2 minutes. Anything that was said after 2 minutes will not be shared here today. This was done to ensure standardization across the interviews we conducted. Finally, any candidates who may not have participated in the Zoom interview will have 2 minutes to present an opening statement live. So let's get ready to hear from candidates. Emily will play the recorded Zoom interviews for us. We'll start with Aisha Chughtai, then go in alphabetical order by last name.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Great. So, Minneapolis is doing some really good and important things, but we're nowhere near meeting our city's affordable housing needs. We have to be prioritizing more public and social housing, and we have to challenge the faith that we place in the free market to deliver the housing solutions we need right now. Minneapolis has some really strong tenant protections, like limiting landlords' ability to discriminate based on credit scores or ability to pay really high initial deposits. And we have some strong zoning policies in the 2040 plan that help us, build more housing. But we know that this alone isn't enough. We have to strengthen these policies, and then we have to introduce ones that are specifically aimed at protecting tenants and keeping them in their homes, like pay or quit, tenant opportunity to purchase, and rent control. In 2016, we know that there was not a single neighborhood in Minneapolis where the average Black family could afford the median rent. So that means we're failing to meet our city's affordable housing needs. We need to better prioritize public housing because we are too dependent on incentives in the private market. Through the loopholes created by Section 18 and RAD that essentially privatize public housing, we are reducing the amount of income-based housing left in the city. We have to avoid the rapid gentrification of historically Black and Brown neighborhoods, and the conversations around this have to be led by and center the BIPOC residents who live there. And then we have to treat homelessness as the public housing or the public health crisis that we know it is. And we have to be using our resources to help folks who are living in encampments, making sure that they have their immediate needs met, have access to social services, rather than using those resources to violently evict people.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
Yeah, so we continue to fail in adequately investing in public housing in this city. We know that public housing is a critical piece of our affordable housing infrastructure, and it's one that often gets ignored or overlooked in favor of our over-reliance on zoning reforms and on incentivizing private companies to include affordable housing units in their developments. These are really important tools, and we have to increase our but we have to be increasing our investment in public housing and win the support and resources that we need from other branches of government to build more. This is really, really important because most of our solutions so far have prioritized renters who are relatively in the middle. And that's necessary, and we have to fight fiercely to defend and expand the progress we've made. But we haven't actually done enough to protect people who are falling through the cracks and those who are hurting the most. The way we move through crises is by prioritizing the people who are the most vulnerable and like lifting the floor for them. And public housing is often like a really important and final protection that low wealth renters have from losing a reliable home. We have to do some more work around the financing of housing to help reduce our reliance on big banks and their private predatory practices. We do some of that through community and commercial land trusts, and I want to see us expand that. We need a permanent and public rental assistance fund in Minneapolis. And then our city has a tendency to overlook the needs of renters, especially those who are immigrants, public housing residents, and low wealth. And we have to be looking to community-led movements to guide the housing policies that make a real difference in the lives of vulnerable and marginalized renters. And then we need people in City Hall who are going to stand with those who are organizing on the ground to make sure that our city is meeting the needs of our affordable housing.
What are the practical skills and or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
I am a renter, and I have experienced housing instability and insecurity my entire life. I know firsthand the ways in which our housing system fails low wealth people, immigrants, and those who have trouble finding housing because of other life circumstances. Because I've watched my family, my loved ones, and my neighbors and I experience those things. But I don't think it's just my lived experience that makes me uniquely suited to address our city's affordable housing needs in a city that is majority renters and in a ward that's overwhelmingly renters. I've organized around housing justice with organizations like IX, United Renters for Justice. In my own neighborhood in Whittier, I have helped organize my neighbors to successfully put pressure on out-of-state property management companies that were, evicting a building full of working class and mostly immigrant families. As an organizer, I have the skills and the knowledge to maneuver within unjust systems and uplift the voices of those who are being left out of the discussion. I am the best candidate to make sure that those who have the greatest need have the power and the agency to make decisions about what happens to them in their communities. You know, I really believe in a world where the systems around us are rooted in justice and care, and they actually meet our needs. And that's not the reality of the world that we live in. So we need someone who both understands that and can deliver critical wins for working class people in a system that we know is fundamentally set up against us. In my work, in my activism, and in my day-to-day life, I've developed the resilience and the skills that are needed to fight for the world that we deserve to live in.
Thank you. We will now hear the recorded statements of Alicia Gibson.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Okay, I see the question, so I think it's time for me to start talking to answer it. So generally speaking, I do think that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies. I know that that may seem like an odd statement to make because we are still very much living in an affordable housing crisis. But the reality is that this is a segment of our economy that really takes a while to recover. Once it's kind of been decimated or once you're in crisis, you can start at a positive direction, but it takes a while for the ship to start turning around. I do believe that we are poised for the ship to be turning around as we are moving in the right direction. We had a historic $40 million that was in the Minneapolis city budget for affordable housing that would go towards better representation for renters and housing court, rehabbing of rental properties, and an historic investment in our affordable housing trust. Then what we will be coming up with another $28 million within the mayor's budget for affordable housing from the money that has been given to us from the federal government for the pandemic recovery. There are a couple other programs that I want to highlight that have recently started that I also think are, things that are going in the right direction. And that is the 4D program, which is essentially, I think of it as almost like a voluntary form of rent control, where property owners, landlords can opt into a system where they, promise to keep their rents at affordable levels, and they get tax incentives to be part of the program. That's a program that we really need to grow. We need to look at how we can expand it. Another one is the Stable Home, Stable Schools, which focuses on children and families, and that has made a difference. That's also something that we can grow. And then also making accessory dwelling units legal. We can grow that by actually making it easier to get the permits for those things, but that is another sign in the right direction.
Time. Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
So despite the fact that I do think that we are headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing, there are also some tools, policy tools that we could use and some areas. The number one priority for me in this will be closing the home ownership gap between, white families, white home ownership, and Black and other historically marginalized communities. We know that we are basically among the worst in the nation for this, and home ownership in this country really is the way that you build generational wealth and where you get into middle class and stay in the middle class. So it's really crucial for us to focus on this. I have one idea that we can use, and I would be open to others. But one idea that I have is to use our neighborhood home loan financing structure that is really very innovative and original in this country. And we could create a new category of home loans that would be for down payment assistance for people from historically marginalized communities. That would enable them to, buy homes in areas where we previously had red line, really work to close that gap. Another idea that I have for policy tools is to also use the neighborhood association home financing structure to do land banking of naturally occurring affordable housing, because naturally occurring affordable housing is an area that we have overlooked. We must protect all of the naturally occurring affordable housing that we have, because we lose 4,000 a year units in Minnesota, and we only build back 1,000. So I would like to give pots of money to the neighborhood association so that they can participate in the market structure, because I've heard from nonprofit developers and affordable housing groups that they have money, but it's a slow process and they can't participate in the market quickly enough. Finally, the third thing that we can do better is to collaborate with the county, because housing is really a
Time. What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
So let me begin with, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about affordable housing. I was a child who moved from home to home because we were housing insecure. I've lived in trailers, I've lived in apartments, I've had a home foreclosed on me as a child. Once our home was foreclosed, it was very difficult for my family to be able to afford a home of our own. And so we again bounced around from, place to place. We weren't able to buy our own home until I was a senior in high school. And that's the home where I'm talking to you from today. To this day, I consider it my home, because it was such a big deal to be able to finally put down roots. I myself was, a student. I'm a lifelong learner, and lived in rental apartments all over the Ward 10 in Minneapolis. I didn't own my own home as an adult until I was 35 years old. I certainly understand the pressures of school loans, debt, incomes that are not matching the rate of inflation, that are not matching the cost of living. And so this is something that that I feel very deeply, very personally about. It's why when we had a naturally occurring affordable housing building that was going to be torn down, you saw me there leading protests, leading letter writing campaign, calling for our city leaders to get involved. You can count on me to be involved, because it's something that I've lived and I care passionately about. Another set of skills that I bring is that I'm a collaborator and I'm a problem solver. I trained in conflict and peace and conflict resolution. I have a law degree, and I have been training in restorative practices and restorative facilitation. So I bring with me a lot of tools for processing, understanding, and working through, community and human-based.
Time.
Thank you. And we will now hear the recorded statements of Katie Jones.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
We must start with the fact that we're a growing city. 50,000 people have moved here in the last 10 years, a trend that will only continue, especially knowing that we're an attractive place for climate refuge. And all of this is putting price pressure on our housing. While I'm encouraged by policies like inclusionary zoning and programs like Stable Homes, Stable Schools, Minneapolis has to address the housing crisis we have today and ensure that everyone has access to housing tomorrow and in the future. To ensure housing today, the city must work with the county and nonprofit partners to prioritize resources towards those with the greatest need, neighbors without homes. We must listen and understand their barriers to shelter. I'm inspired by the Envision and Avivo Indoor Villages projects, which address issues of security and privacy and provide necessary wraparound services. Projects like this must be fully funded and implemented quickly. For Housing Tomorrow, I prioritize supports for the most vulnerable, those making less than 30% area median income. I'm a fan of the 4D program, which keeps rents affordable in naturally occurring affordable housing buildings in exchange for reduced tax liability. I want to find pathways to keep neighbors in their homes and property ownership local through ideas such as the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And I want to rebalance power between renters and rental property owners through policies that prevent price gouging and stabilize rents, while ensuring safeguards good upkeep and maintenance. I'm also excited about the pending single room occupancy legalization, but that cannot be hamstrung by red tape, like only allowing such properties to be owned by public entities or nonprofits. The decisions that we make now can stave off future housing crises and future harms of displacement. As we continue to grow, we must expand the number of homes and the variety of them, from apartments to houses to condos to boarding rooms, boarding house rooms, senior living, ADUs, cooperatives, and triplexes. That means making it easier to build, as well as making it easier to renovate current properties to make our housing fit our needs. Every Minneapolis resident has a right to access safe, stable, and affordable housing, and I am committed to delivering that to the future for our city.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
One area that needs more attention is making sure that our housing solutions are not only working to house every person in the city, but helps residents thrive. Housing is one of the best ways for families and individuals to build personal wealth, which is why efforts to increase home ownership and support small property ownership must include equity in the plans at their core. To achieve this, I would push to evaluate our inclusionary zoning policy definitions to ensure that it is creating homes that are affordable for those earning less than 30% area median income, which is around $32,000 a year. Facilitate greater study of housing needs involving stakeholders from residents to developers, and to identify particular market gaps, for example, 3+ family bedroom units, and barriers to development, such as expanding our housing into past protections to help stabilize rents and allow renters to begin saving money and secure a more stable housing future. I think it's also critical that we not reinvent the wheel. Having lived in Austria, I've seen some of the world's most successful models for affordable housing. The core of those models is maximizing and leveraging city-owned land. We must prioritize using city-owned land for community land trusts and building to the maximum density. We also need to be focused on making sure our commitment to housing includes all residents, and that it fits our commitment to tackle the climate crisis. This includes providing green job training, specifically in energy efficiency and solar, to tighten our homes and decarbonize the energy our homes use, as well as exploring pollution and sound mitigation features, particularly along high traffic roadways, such as using things like vertical gardens and fences, as well as solar arrays. Doing so improves local housing stock, as well as reduces energy bills, local air pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
I'm an engineer, a community builder, and a climate advocate, and I put my skills to use to bring people together to solve some of our toughest problems. With almost a decade of experience working inside and with City Hall, I will be ready on day one to start addressing our affordable housing needs, which is important because this seat will only have 2 years to work before the next election. No one in this race has the breadth of experience in housing as I have. Having been a renter, I've lived in also in effectively what was a single room occupancy unit. I'm a triplex owner. One of our units was part of the Stable Homes, Stable Schools program, and I'm now building an accessory dwelling unit. As a former renter who was at one point priced out of her apartment, I have lived through the power imbalance between property owners and renters, and understand that renters need further protections to stop practices like price gouging. With my when my husband and I were ready to purchase a home, we wanted to stay in our walkable, bikeable neighborhood, which was close to jobs and friends. And we intentionally sought out a small multifamily property to give us that financial flexibility and live our values of supporting density. And I want others to have that option too. I want others to have that opportunity to stay in their neighborhoods, and having small multifamily properties and more of those is a way to do that. Also, having participated in the Stable Home, Stable Schools program, I know that when well executed, our city programs can directly work to keep families in our community. And as someone who is building a secondary structure, and I've evaluated the ADU and cluster development options, I've experienced the difficulty in trying to design even a modest building to conform with city requirements. Some of the requirements seem especially odd, such as front facade window to wall ratio requirements for a rear structure. Given the fact that secondary structures don't face the street, such facades shouldn't need to comply with the requirements as if they did. My experience has taught me what is working and what isn't working at the city level right now. I will take this into consideration and listen to the
Time.
Thank you. We will now hear the recorded statements of Chris Parsons.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Well, that's an excellent question, Maggie, and thank you for it. I don't believe that we're doing the right things that we should be doing as a city as far as our policies to increase affordable housing and to bring relief to the issues of affordable housing in our city. First of all, we have to understand that housing is a right and it's largely market-based. So there are a number of things that we can be doing to make housing more affordable. One, we do have to increase the housing supply. And like I said, it's largely a commodity, and affordability is largely based on market forces. But we also need to make sure that we're building enough housing for everyone. So that includes families and larger families. And we need to include home ownership opportunities with that so that we can help close the racial wealth gap. Two, we need to preserve our existing affordable housing. That's our naturally occurring affordable housing. Right now, it's too costly to build new affordable housing. And we currently have a good stock of buildings. I currently live in a 100-year-old building. With proper care, it'll probably last another 100 years. Three, we need to limit the number of residential properties, single-family homes that can be purchased by investors that are outside of our community. Investors are building or purchasing single-family homes and renting them out at much higher cost than a mortgage would be. Fourth, we need to partner with local governments, county, federal governments, and nonprofits to be able to provide grants and funding and rental assistance for folks. For folks that slip through the cracks, we need to provide more rental assistance and also assist those that are unhoused with funding or with housing through nonprofits. But we also need good paying jobs.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
Sure, that's a great question again, Maggie. Right now, I think we're relying too much on the 2040 plan. The 2040 plan was really too much of a giveaway to developers, and there are a number of things that are happening with that, consequences, whether they're unintended, intended, or otherwise, that are hurting housing policy in our city. We're not preventing the destruction of our current wealth building opportunities, and we're encouraging homes, single family homes, to be torn down and to have unaffordable housing opportunities or unaffordable housing put up in their place. We need to look at ways as a city that we can provide grants and access to capital for people to be able to purchase their homes. The best way that we can help people afford housing is to empower them. And when you have a mortgage, when you're owning your home, that is power. I've had 3 mortgages in this city so far in my life, and never has my monthly payment gone up because I'm not at the whims of some landlord or developer or some nameless, faceless corporation that is just going to raise my rent on a whim. So We need to look at more, we need to look at our zoning policies more on a case-by-case basis. And we need to do all we can to preserve our current affordable housing stock. For instance, like I said before, I lived in a 100-year-old building. If this building was torn down, rebuilt with the exact same square footage, and I was to purchase my home, I would not be able to afford my current home. So those are just a couple of things we can do, as well as pursue developers that want to have inclusionary financing.
Time. What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
So I'm the only candidate in this race that's grown up in Minneapolis. My parents moved here when they were in their mid-20s. When I was 2 years old, they brought me and my brother here from a small town in southern Iowa. I grew up in a mixed race family. My father's Black, my mom is white. They had very blue collar jobs. We rented in my entire childhood, my parents never owned a home. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment in what you would consider, a middle rate apartment building. The building's still there. It's now surrounded by luxury condos. The neighborhood's really changed. When I was 14, we moved into a mom and pop landlord situation where I was able to get my own room. It was affordable for my parents, and we had a yard, and it was just another step up. So we need to encourage investment in the city. That's one of the things that I see, is that we need to encourage those middle of the road investors, the people that will provide those affordable apartments and those affordable mom and pop landlord situations. And we need to have policies that will encourage that investment, but also obviously protect renters at the same time. Growing up as a renter and then having my first apartment on 30th and Lake right around the corner from the Poodle Club, I know, that renters do need protections and from landlords that have poor policies and practices. So we need to encourage local ownership for people to purchase homes, but also we need to encourage local investors and investors that really have the best interests of the community at heart.
Thank you. And thank you, candidates, for being here tonight and introducing yourselves through our video questionnaire. We're now ready to move on to the next phase of our event, where we will hear directly from candidates in response to audience questions. If you're joining us today, please use the Q&A feature to ask any housing-related questions you have for candidates. Make Homes Happen has also prepared a few questions. To be fair, we will rotate which candidate answers first. Candidates, you will each have 2 minutes to respond to the question. We will time you and mute you at 2 minutes. We'll start with our first question for Alicia Gibson. The question is from an audience member, and it is related to the Rent Stabilization Charter Amendment. The question is, can candidates say whether they are in favor or against the rent control question that will be on the ballot, and why?
Yes, thank you for that question. This one is tough for me because I think that people should be allowed to vote on a rent control measure. The Minnesota state law says that cities cannot pass rent control, but their second clause in that says that people, that can vote on it in a general election. The amendment that has been given to us, however, has an illegal clause in it. It says it's a mechanism for how we will have rent control. And the first clause says that city council can pass rent control. That is in direct violation of the Minnesota statute. The second clause says that that the city council would pass a rent control plan and the general population would vote on it. That is good. That makes sense. So in this instance, I'm going to be voting against it because it's not good governance to be having clauses in your charter that directly contravene Minnesota state law. If the question is about rent control itself, I'm very open-minded to pursuing an understanding of how we can keep people in their homes. But I don't want us to confuse means and ends. So what I would like to do is have a working group that is going to look specifically at how we keep people in their homes. This would be made up of all different kinds of partners, people who work for, collaborate with the Make Homes Happen group. They would also include all kinds of affordable housing developers, market developers, public housing experts, so that we can really get a better understanding of how we keep people in homes.
Thank you. And Katie Jones, same question.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I want to first just kind of jump off of what Alicia was saying. And I think the background is really important, just given where we are. And I know there are a lot of ballot amendments up on the ballot this year. And when it comes to rent stabilization, you know, I don't think that this amendment would have gone forward and been put on the ballot had the city attorney not thought that it was legal. So I think that's important to note. And there have been no legal proceedings brought against it. So I think it is fair and legal for us to move forward with this as a city. And secondly, so I'm approaching this as both someone who has rented and who is currently someone who provides rentals. And as a landlord, I'm actually in favor of providing, you know, making sure that rent stabilization can move forward in Minneapolis. And I think the thing that really tripped it over for me in my head was that, you know, talking to folks who have been living in buildings for a long amount of time, and, you know, they may have a new property owner come in and do some basic touch-ups to the building, but then jack up rent $200 and $300. To me, that is price gouging. That is just like if we're in an oil crisis and a gas station suddenly jacks up the cost of your gallon of gas. And we have regulations around that. I think it's fair to have regulations around housing. And I like that it's actually being put, you know, that the voters are giving the city council permission to work through this, because I do agree that we need to be very thoughtful around this, because there have been mistakes made in San Francisco and New York City where yet people get to stay in their homes, and yet there is a limit to the number of homes being allowed to be created. So my number one priority is to make sure we're continuing to build a number of homes, because, you know, a lot of people are wanting to move to our city, and we want to make sure that there is space for them. And if we are de-incentivizing that at all, I think that just puts us at a disadvantage. And so I think it's a both and situation where we need to be building more and making sure that people are not price gouged and displaced out of their homes.
Thank you. And Chris Parsons, same question.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I think that we can all agree that housing is a right, and that, you know, we all agree with the goal that housing needs to be more affordable for more people. The difference is, what do we feel are the proper means for us to get there? Rent control works. It works for people that are in rent controlled units, whether they need the rent control or not. In the long term, though, the long-term effects are counterproductive to the goals of rent control. And it's not just me saying this, but many economists and case studies back this up. Costs in the supply of housing in our country is based mostly on market forces. Minneapolis does not exist in a vacuum, and rent control will lead to a reduction in the availability of affordable units and rental units in general. And it'll also hurt the quality of housing. Rent restrictions will chase developers out of the city limits, where there are plenty of places to build close to downtown where you don't necessarily have to build inside Minneapolis city limits. And they'll be able to, developers will be able to do that without rent restrictions. Existing landlords may decide to turn their apartments into condos because they don't want to deal with rent restrictions, and that will remove those apartments from the rental market completely. Add to this that folks in rent controlled units will be unlikely to give up their units. And that means that people trying to enter the market will be further shut out. And also it will hurt the quality of housing, as landlords will be less likely to make improvements. It'll also hurt small local investors who make up the bulk of overall investors. For about half of these investors, it's a break-even endeavor from year to year, and they won't be able to keep up their current investment, which will in turn benefit large landlords, which are less likely to value their tenants.
Thank you. And Aisha Chughtai, that's the last one for this question.
Yeah. So I believe housing to be a human right. And as a renter and someone who has experienced housing insecurity my whole life, I am really excited to be supporting ballot question 3 to explore rent control as a city. As folks may remember, right, our city leaders presented 2 options for us to explore rent control. One that was a citizen-led option, and then one that was a council-initiated process. And then our mayor vetoed the first citizen-led process, and that's how we ended up with this question on the ballot. So, you know, it feels really important to remember. And then, you know, Minneapolis is a majority renter city. Ward 10 is an overwhelmingly renter ward. 80% of us are renters. And this is a policy that is going to make a tangible difference in the day-to-day lives of people who live in our community, so that we're able to live and stay here for the long term. Thank
you. Okay, and just a reminder to attendees to put any questions that you have in the Q&A. I'm going to go ahead on to the first question that is prepared for Make Homes Happen. And the first person who will be answering this is Katie. So describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, sometimes referred to as NOAH, in the market.
Yes, thanks for the question. And the immediate program that came to mind is the 4D program. And I know that a couple of us have actually already talked about that today. But what I think it's a really efficient program that provides a mechanism for properties to be kept affordable for a period of 10 years in exchange for a reduction in tax liability for a property owner. And so that's a pretty attractive thing for property owners. And I know that that program gets booked up pretty quickly. And the other benefit to that program is that there's a tie into energy efficiency with incentives to pay for up to 90% of the cost of the upgrades, which also benefits the renters to making sure that the utility payments that they have to make are also reduced. I'm also going to add in one more thing on there. Another program that I really am excited about is community land trusts, because they keep properties affordable in perpetuity. The tricky part there is just acquiring more land is difficult and expensive for the city. And so there's a lot of things that we're trying to balance, but those would be the top 2 programs at the top of my list to make sure that we're keeping housing affordable. And when we are creating community land trusts, I want to make sure that we are building to the maximum density that the zoning allows, so that, you know, again, we're creating as many homes as we possibly can, because, you know, as people are coming here, I want to make sure that everyone who wants a home has a home, and that it fits their needs.
Thank you. And Chris, same question.
I would look at a program that the city already has in place, such as the 4D program, and you know, looking at structures, we could go by age, and then also seeing what the cost of the units as how they relate to AMI and the affordability. We could look at measures that way and add buildings in to the 4D program and expand it that way. But that's going to take an infusion and a further investment of city funds. And so that's one program that we could be using.
Yeah, so in the long term, the best way for us to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing for the people who need it the most in the city is, you know, doing everything we can to decommodify housing and move things from private ownership to public ownership and public good. One of the tools that we have to do that is through the expansion of land trusts in our city. And, you know, land trusts are a way for us to creatively own housing and keep it as a good for families and for multiple generations. It's also a way for us to be able to maintain affordability. It's a way for us to be able to access home ownership for families, and push back against the rapid gentrification of our historically Black and Brown neighborhoods. And so, working with neighborhood organizations, with nonprofits that are doing this work already, and expanding our use of land trusts in the city.
Thank you. And Alicia, same question.
Yeah, I think it sounds like there's a lot of common ground here. Among the candidates, I'm one of the few that is talking about kind of a novel way of doing the land banking and the land trusts. And that is something that I mentioned in the video. This was, I talked to, one of the things I do is I talk to the people who are experts in something to learn about what are the stumbling blocks, what is getting in the way of them being successful. And when I was doing that, the partners told me that they can get financing to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, but the market often moves too quickly for them to actually participate in it. And so the idea occurred to me, what if we had pots of money set aside in advance that community organizations could use to participate in that market process? And they wouldn't always win, but sometimes they would. And then they could permanently land bank it, transfer the ownership and the management to a nonprofit who specializes in that. So that would be a way of actually doing this work, right? Of getting them into sustainably getting some of these land trusts going, in addition to a good idea of making sure that we're using the city-owned property to support that as well. The other thing that people were talking about that I want to highlight is looking at our building codes, because I think that this is something that we really can restructure some of these codes so that people can renovate their homes, renovate buildings, and make them make affordable housing, make the kind of housing that people want to live in and that people can afford to live in.
Thank you. The next question is going to come from an audience member, and for this one, we'll start with Chris for the answer. So the question is, what are your thoughts on the gentrification of Uptown?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, when you look at Uptown and you look at the building that's been going on in this city, we need to make sure that we're building housing that meets the needs of our community. All you have to do is look around, and you're seeing that's not happening. We're building a lot of luxury housing that is 2 bedrooms or less. It's out of the price range of most people, and definitely out of the price range of many families. So we need to make sure that we're building housing that meets our needs. We also need to make sure that we get a grip on the rampant speculation that's occurring in our city that is leading to gentrification. The upzoning authorized by the 2040 plan and the city council's penchant for handing out variances has been a boon for developers at the cost of affordable housing. It's caused speculation in the housing market that's driven up housing costs and leading to a reduction in home ownership opportunities. Housing doesn't exist in a vacuum. When we build high cost luxury buildings, it drives up prices of surrounding units. We should include tools in our toolkit to help mitigate gentrification, such as inclusionary zoning, but I would use that sparingly. Often the market price units end up absorbing the cost of the below rate market units. And we need to also encourage home ownership so that we can stabilize the cost increases for families. We can encourage wealth building. We can close the racial wealth gap. And that would help us mitigate the gentrification that we see going on in Uptown.
Thank you. All right, and Aisha, same question.
Yeah, so, we have to be building more affordable housing as a city and encouraging the investment in building more of that, making sure that we're not just building to provide solutions for folks who are relatively in the middle, And that, you know, using tools like our zoning process, subsidizing affordable housing units, and incentivizing the building of more affordable units, and then the protection of public housing through fighting the privatization efforts through the Section 18 and RAD loopholes, and then using our public housing levy to invest more money in public housing. And then, you know, we have to prevent the displacement of people in Uptown and all over our city in rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods by investing in the protection of people who live there. And that happens through rent control, and it happens through policies like tenant opportunity to purchase, which allows access to home ownership for renters and for folks who are living in our communities.
Thank you. Alicia, same question.
I'm really glad this question was asked. I was just doing some research ahead of the forum today and ran across from June of this year a blog from the Urban Institute that talked about how Black home ownership was really being squeezed out of Minneapolis. And they gave us a map that looked at the places where there was gentrification happening in the most concentrated ways. That was really pressuring low income and also Black homeowners out of the city. And one of the places on that map was actually that northern section of South Uptown. So this is not just anecdotal that people who I've been door knocking talking about, they've been talking about this feeling that they're being squeezed out. This is, you know, this is verified in the data and by people who are looking at this, experts from the outside. So one of the things that we need to be doing, which is something that I had actually been advocating at the neighborhood association for many years, is that when we are thinking about giving variances to developers, to be looking at how it's going to impact the area in which it's going in and also impacting the property rates. We've had, I don't have anything against development, but it really needs to be balanced. And what kind of development are we going to have? In our ward, and specifically in Uptown, we've had really high rates of very high market and luxury, like Chris had mentioned, and that has really increased property tax values. That hurts our low income homeowners, and that is a tax that is passed off to renters. So that also increases our renters. So what I would want to do is to not pass out variances like candy. I want us to understand, look at the maps of where the affordable housing is in the city, where the public housing is in the city, and really advocate.
Thank you. Sorry, I have to mute you. That's time. All right, and Katie, same question.
Yeah, so I think the really important thing is to look at the history of what got us here today. Redlining and the inability to build has really constrained our market up until about 2010, 2011, when we were able to actually start building more buildings in Uptown. And so that basically hamstrung the market. And so really the buildings that are most affordable today are the oldest ones. And if we haven't been building, there's basically a period where we weren't building for about 30 years. And so we haven't had buildings age over those 30 years. So we just have this really big gap of either really old buildings or buildings that are less than 10 years old. And so we don't have that gradation in scaling of buildings and aging over time and becoming more affordable. So that it's hard to address that in one fell swoop. It's a lot of history to overcome. And, I've been looking at books from, Generation Priced Out to How to Kill a City, talking to folks I know that work for MCCD with Make Homes Happen, making sure that we're understanding like what are the root causes of this, because there's not going to be one fell swoop of a solution. We need to continue to build housing because we are a land constrained area. And the only only place for us, if we're gonna welcome new people, we have to build up. That is the only direction for us to go, unless we start to try to annex St. Louis Park or Richfield, and I don't think they would like that so much. So we have to be smart. If we're going to be a welcoming, inclusive city, we need to continue to allow people to build, and so that buildings can age. And we are just unfortunately stuck in this position right now where we have either really old buildings or super new ones, and it's going to take a while for those to age. But as we are building new ones, we need to make sure we're utilizing inclusionary zoning, so that we're keeping a diversity of incomes within our neighborhood, because this is a concern, and we want to overall need to make sure that we're continuing to build. And I do want to note that I think there was a comment made.
Sorry about that, that's time. All right, so we do have another audience question coming in. And for this one, we're going to start with Aisha for the first answer. And the question is, what policies will you push that protect renters in our city?
Yeah, so we live in a majority renter city, and making sure that people who are renters are able to stay here for the long haul and continue to keep up with the cost of living is really, really important. One of the best tools that we have to stabilize the price of rent is strong rent control. 85% of the rental properties that are in the city of Minneapolis are owned by 15 companies, so like rent control is a form of us breaking up, or it's a check on the monopoly that large corporations have on our housing market. And then we know that rent control only is effective when it goes hand in hand with really strong tenant protections. So things that keep evictions from happening, just cause and pay or quit policies, along with legal funds that help make sure that anyone who's about to experience an eviction is able to navigate that process, so that their ability to access housing isn't basically destroyed for at least the next 10 years of their life. So together, when we stabilize the price of rent, and then enact policies that keep renters in their homes, and then work on policies that are supposed to be about helping increase home ownership, like tenant opportunity to purchase, land trusts, we can protect renters in our city.
Thank you. Alicia, same question.
So it's really important that we pass renter protections. And I actually want to give some credit to the current council, because I think that they have passed a pretty good package of renter protections in the past few years. It's one thing to have these renter protections, and it's another thing to actually follow through with them and have leaders who advocate for our renters, who show up when their rights are being violated, and connect people to the resources. So one of the things that I would like to focus on, first of all, is being present. 2003 Aldrich is around the corner from me, and that was a location where there was a naturally occurring affordable housing building that was damaged, and the people who did the damage were able to purchase it at the time, and then they tore it down. At the time when it caused this crack to go through the building, when the damage finally became, basically permanent, people had only 72 hours, some 48, some 24, and there was nobody who showed up to tell them about how they were going to advocate on their behalf. And maybe that's the lawyer in me, but that is a failure of the system, because there were things that they could have done, and there were rights that they had that were timed out. So you can count on me to be there for that. I would like for us to amp up the housing court representation, so that our tenants, when they go to housing court, they're able to represent themselves better. The other thing I do like, this idea of tenant ownership through the right of first offer. I think that we've been focusing on the right of first refusal, which actually puts a lot of constraints in the system and disincentivizes people from putting their housing in the market to have renters. Let's focus on the right of first offer and then create some really great programs that actually educate tenants on how to use that right, and maybe even some funding that enables them to access that to exercise it.
Thank you. And Katie, same question.
Yeah, I think the council in the past few years has established quite a robust number of tenant protections, but I do want to make sure that we're adding to that. You know, when we have just cause eviction, but then also thinking about having or making sure we're investing in representation in housing court. That is, I think, just really crucial that people know what they're getting into and actually have some confidence as they're going into those processes, because they can feel very overwhelming. I also want to make sure we're fully funding and having robust rental licensing structures. It was insane that the Steve Friends episode happened and was so prolonged over so many years, that he owned so many rental units and was had so many tier 3 rental buildings that he was somehow still able to own. And it took so long for there to be consequences for that. And I think we need to have a more robust way to make sure we're holding bad landlords accountable for that. And I think last but not least, I did want to mention someone had talked about building codes, and actually the city has no jurisdiction over building codes, so that's not something that we can work on. And I think it is just very crucial when any candidate is talking about what we're promising to do. We have to make sure that, you know, it is actually within the city's limits and legal limits to be able to work on that.
Thank you. And Chris, same question.
So growing up as a renter, as I mentioned in my video, my parents were renters for my entire childhood. So I know how important it is for renters to be protected, especially from unscrupulous practices by landlords. You know, homes are, a stable home is very important because it's your base of operation, and it's without it, you cannot thrive. What we can do as a city and policies that I will push for, one, that is to make sure that we have options for people so that they're not held under the thumb of unscrupulous landlords, so that people have choice in places to go, so that we are building the types of housing that we need. And right now, especially for families, which are and large families, which are disproportionately immigrant and people of color, we're not building enough types of housing to accommodate families. We're not building enough 3-bedroom plus. So we need to make sure that people have those options so that they're not stuck. Also, it was just talked about, but the city does need a more robust licensing and inspection program, so that issues are caught and brought to the forefront, so that tenants don't feel that they are in a position where they need to report and then possibly face retaliation. And then we also need more education for renters. We need to reach out to renters and let them know their rights, and also to let landlords know their responsibilities. So more education for everybody would also be a benefit, and that's something that I would push for.
Thank you. And just a reminder, if attendees have additional questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. For the next question, we will use one of our prepared questions. And for this one, we will start with Alicia. Let me pull up. As a city council member, what would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
Yeah, I mentioned this briefly, but I'm glad to have an opportunity to talk about it again. I am the only candidate in this race that has come up with a novel idea on this one, and potentially in the city, I haven't heard very many people talking about some ideas on this. one of the things that I would like to do is looking at our neighborhood association system, home financing that we have, build in another category of home loans that would be very specifically for people, Black and Native families, first-time home buyers, to access down payment assistance. The loans that we get through the neighborhood system, in case people don't know about it, are typically very small. The maximum is about $10,000. Some of them, they all have very low interest rates. Some of them are forgiven if you live in a place for, a period of time. The $10,000 is interesting because that is what the data shows us families of color, Black families, don't have in terms of generational wealth building. So this could be, something that we could really be providing. I've mentioned this idea to several different people who work in this field, and they actually think it's an idea that has legs. So it's something that I would like for us to grow. I was speaking earlier today with somebody who has been the executive director of the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, and she said that one of the things that worked for them many years ago was actually to provide education about home ownership. And that was a way, they had a really concerted program on that, and they actually moved people out of public housing and into home ownership. And when we're on the topic of public housing, I do want to make a note because I think there was a little bit of a confusion here. Public housing is different than affordable housing, and we have an affordable housing levy. The public housing is something that I 100% support, and I want to be a strong advocate in getting federal dollars into our city, which means that we need to make sure that our public housing is being run as well as it possibly can. So we're
that's time. All right, and Katie, same question.
Yeah, I think one of the critical things is thinking about home ownership differently and beyond just single family homes. So if we're going to be expanding housing options and home ownership options, you need to be thinking about, condos and duplexes and triplexes as other ways of building wealth. Just because the cost of single family homes in this city is it's very expensive. And so if we can provide more, other opportunities and expand the dollars that we're using to more and more families to get that, to have that first ownership opportunity, I think that's really critical. And I know I have a friend over on the north side who bought a duplex because of that diverse income that type of property can provide. I also want to just note, so I've been a part of the neighborhood association for a number of years, was board president for a year, and I definitely would not want any housing program to run through neighborhoods. Neighborhoods typically don't have the infrastructure set up to really support that type of, that level of loans. And we know that the housing dollars that were put in through NRP actually created inequities in our system because it invested way more in home ownership and homeowners than it did in renters. And I don't want to be investing more in that gap. I think we want to be closing that. And it's just nonprofits are not the right way to go. We have great programs through Minneapolis Homes, the build and the rehab programs. And there are experts in that. I want to elevate and lift their voices for what good has been done. We can always take lessons learned from that. But let's not decentralize that. I think we can take input in from neighborhoods, but the city is where the structures actually lie to provide that financing.
Thank you. Chris, same question.
Great question. Yeah, so systemic racism and income inequality has made it very difficult for families of color to come up with capital and down payments on homes. And, especially when you look at our housing market now, many folks are losing out on home ownership because they're not able to put down large amounts of cash. So what I would like to do is I would like to bolster the city's Home Ownership Works program so that we can provide more down payment assistance for families of color to enter the housing market, and then also provide a more robust education program on home ownership. Because when you look at home ownership being generational for white people, it's a common thing for home ownership to be generational among families of color, not so much. So breaking down a lot of the misconceptions and demystifying the home ownership process, educating people and giving them the power that way is an important step in the process.
Thank you. Aisha, same question.
So home ownership is one of the ways in which families build generational wealth and generational stability within their households and in their family structures. The home ownership gap between white families and families of color is the legacy of really predatory practices and racist practices by large financial institutions that kept families of color from being able to access the same things that white families were in terms of financing. And then racial covenants in the city that, kept Black and brown families out of, parts of our city. And so when we think about like, what's it going to take to combat that? We have some pretty good programs that I'd like to see us expand and fund more around providing assistance to first-time home buyers in terms of like navigating the process of purchasing a home, and then assistance in paying a large down payment, and then making sure that programs like this existing is a really, really good thing, but making sure that the people who need it the most are able to actually access it and understand it and utilize it, that's a whole other thing. And it's something the city actually isn't all that good at, and I want to see us improve our skills there. And then creative ownership models, duplexes and triplexes certainly, but then also thinking about the use of community land trusts. And then again, I'm like the standard bearer for this policy, but tenant opportunity to purchase as a way for us to think about both cooperative ownership and then about first-time home ownership of families.
Thank you. So we are starting to get close to the end of our time. So the next question that I'm going to ask will be our last question of the evening. And so within your 2 minutes, please make any final statements that you want to include in your response. And for the last question, we will start with Katie. What steps will you take as city council member to address homelessness in our city and ensure unsheltered residents have access to safe, stable, and dignified housing?
Thank you for the question. And this is, you saw in my video, this is one of the things that I led with. We need to be making sure we have housing today, tomorrow, and in the future. And today means addressing the needs of those who are most vulnerable, those who are without shelter right now. And I think, learning from those who are experiencing homelessness is the first step, and understanding what are the barriers to shelter. And throughout, especially the last year and a half, we've been learning that privacy and security are two big barriers to going into the current shelter model. And so I'm really inspired by the Indoor Villages project and the Envision project, that are addressing both of those. And so as well as things like the county's hotel purchases that they've been using during COVID, having dedicated spaces for individuals helps give them that privacy and security. So when they're sleeping at night, they don't have to worry about their stuff being stolen. That gives them dignity, just like we all want. And so I think those are very viable paths. And especially given, how COVID has changed how we use buildings entirely. We have a lot of old hotel space that is not being utilized or optimally used right now. And so how can we put that to better use, especially given that there are people who don't have a place to lay their heads at night? I want to be utilizing those creatively, working with partners, nonprofits, the county, the state. I don't know that we can do this alone, but I think we can do it together, and I'm committed to doing so.
Thank you. Chris, same question.
So I think the council took a very important step in addressing one aspect of homelessness, and that was to kind of help take the pressure off of kind of the lower end, and that was to approve single room occupancies. So that I think that that is an important piece to the puzzle. But also, you know, as a firefighter and emergency responder, I've seen firsthand how homelessness opens people up to victimization. There's a lot of drug use, assaults, sexual assaults, human trafficking that goes on when people are homeless and they're untethered from resources. So it's an issue that we need to get a handle on, and I think that the city and the county and nonprofits working together have done a pretty good job on making sure that, you know, folks that desire shelter are getting it. However, there are still people that are slipping through the cracks, and a lot of those folks are dealing with issues of mental health and drug addiction. So we need to make sure that we're bringing in drug addiction counselors and psychiatrists and reaching out to these people, because these aren't people that are necessarily going to walk in the door. We need to make sure that we're seeking them out and putting them in touch with services that can help them.
Thank you. Aisha, same question.
So we have to make sure that we're doing every single thing we can to ensure that no one in our communities is going without a home. Leaving people unhoused is a choice, and pursuing all the options we can to ensure a home for everyone is our responsibility. And it's the responsibility of city leaders to completely rework how we're addressing homelessness, unsheltered homelessness specifically, both in the short term and then in the long term too. In the short term, I want to see us stop using the very limited resources that you know, a city budget has already to evict violently people who are living in encampments, and instead focus those on providing public health response, including, you know, hand washing stations and portable bathrooms and things that help stabilize, you know, people who are going through a really rough time in their lives. And then, you know, we have to fund hotel rooms, transitional housing, and permanent housing at a level that really meets the seriousness of housing insecurity in our city right now. And then, you know, again, making sure that public health response is present in the encampments. And then the long term, I want to see us work with our county and our state and federal partners to find more money for housing, and make sure that we are providing the casework support, the mental health support, and, you know, addiction counseling services that folks need who are experiencing homelessness.
Thank you. And Alicia, same question.
I think that homelessness is actually one of the most difficult problems that we face because it has so many different facets to it. My dad, who has retired as a social worker and is now a therapist, works with people who are unhoused and who struggle to stay in housing. And, you know, he talks to me about what is at the root of some of that. So it's pretty complicated because some people don't want shelter, and that's a reality. Now, I went, you know, canvassing with a resident from Ward 10, and we were talking about this with somebody, and she shared with me that, in fact, her mother had experienced homelessness. And so I really talked to her about that and how she, you know, eventually was able to get out of that situation. She was homeless not because she wanted to be. She was homeless not because she had mental health issues. She was homeless because she had a healthcare emergency and couldn't afford it, and that bankrupted her. The way that she got out of homelessness was by finally somebody who had access to resources, city resources, not in our city, in another place, finally heard her story and got her connected. So the number one thing that I think we can do as a city is to make sure that we have enough outreach personnel who are in contact with every single person who is experiencing homelessness to make sure that they can access resources if they want them. The things that have already been mentioned, the indoor villages, the hotels, the SROs, these are all really great things that we have put online in the past year. And I think as a city council member, the next step would be to really be clear in the communication about what does our homeless population look like, and what does our bed situation look like, and to be in a constant conversation with our county, so that is part of how we ensure that this balance is being maintained, and the people who live here who care so passionately about others know.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much, candidates, for participating in our event tonight. It's so important for voters to hear directly from you about the issues that matter, and we're extremely grateful for your time and your willingness to talk about affordable housing in our city. Thank you also to Emily for providing seamless tech support tonight, much appreciated. And thank you to those who have joined us this evening. If you have other questions related to affordable housing, you can contact candidates through the information they shared earlier this evening. Be sure to follow the Make Homes Happen Facebook page, and we will share a recording of this forum on the page along with the other forums that were recorded. Emily's going to share a link to our Facebook page in the chat. And thank you so much again, everyone. Have a good evening.